Well, "O beauty ever ancient, ever new." That phrase is taken from St. Augustine in his famous book called The Confessions. He wrote his autobiography. In fact, from what I understand, he actually kind of coined that genre of a self-reflection and telling of your life. And this is the paragraph coming from The Confessions. You may have heard it. It's beautiful. "Late have I loved you, O beauty ever ancient, ever new. Late have I loved you. You were within me, but I was outside, and it was there that I searched for you. In my unloveliness, I plunged into the lovely things which you created. You were with me, but I was not with you. Created things kept me from you. Yet, if they had not been in you, they would not have been at all. You called, you shouted, and you broke through my deafness. You flashed, you shone, and you dispelled my blindness. You breathed your fragrance on me. I drew in breath, and now I pant for you. I have tasted you. Now I hunger and thirst for more. You touched me, and I burned for your peace." I love that prayer. I've heard it in music. I've heard it in just reading it. I've used it in times of prayer. And just this beauty of God and God's presence in our lives, and to awaken that within us. So what I'd like to do today is basically just offer you a reflection on wonder. It's something that's kind of difficult to actually define, and I'm drawing from my own experiences of I'm going to look a little bit in nature and look at the cosmos and look at the stars through some slides. I'm going to look a little bit about music. And then a little bit on art, and how these things can lift us up and to encounter God's, and how, I guess, let me back and say that's how I've experienced it, and I'm hoping that as I share this, maybe that can pique an interest in you, or maybe draw from your own experience how you've experienced the presence of God in these beautiful things. So a lot of the pictures you see here, if you go to the next picture, it's the same picture. The next slide is the same picture. This is actually taken in Northampton. And I love this just beautiful solitary tree amongst this beautiful yellow field, a field of gold. And we see here something beautiful. When you go there, the starkness of it, it just jumps out at you. It's gorgeous. It's not definable. I can't really, you have to see it. And when you see it, there's something like that just makes you say, wow. Perhaps you've had experience of that. We'll go to the next slide here. This is my other experience here. This is the Grand Canyon. If you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, my first experience of that was this. Literally speechless. Literally, it took my breath away. It was, in a certain sense, incomprehensible. So I just have this other picture here. That's magnificent, untakeable. This is my little nephew who took a picture of this little frog. Now, maybe you don't like frogs, so maybe that's not appealing. But what I love is that if you look at the detail, that's his fingers and how small that little creature is. And those little eyes and all of the organs that make that frog function. Maybe that's grossing you out, I don't know. But that frog still, in me, in a certain sense, as you reflect on it, captures the beauty. So just the next, I have a little quote here from St. Augustine and his Easter sermon. He wrote this in 411. "Question the beauty of the earth. Question the beauty of the sea. Question the beauty of the air, amply spread around everywhere. Question the beauty of the sky. Question the serried ranks of the stars. Question the sun, making the day glorious with its bright beams. Question the moon, tempering the darkness of the following night with its shining rays. Question the animals that move in the waters, that amble on the dry land, that fly in the air. They all answer you, here we are, look, we're beautiful. Their beauty is their confession. Who makes these beautiful, changeable things, if not one who is beautiful and unchangeable?" So what we're going to see here is, this is a Latin word, the via pulchritudinis. You want to say that 5 times fast? It's a Latin word that basically is describing the way of beauty. And this idea that as we contemplate, as we reflect on things that are beautiful, it lifts our spirit and ultimately becomes a signpost to point to God, who is unchangeable and beauty itself. So I'd like to look a little bit at beauty of nature, the beauty of the arts, and I said the beauty that comes to us ultimately from an encounter with Jesus Christ. So this picture that you see here, it's a great side story. I had the opportunity to go to Puerto Rico to practice some Spanish and visit a family, and we had gone to a chapel, an adoration chapel, and then the family I was with was going to take me to the beach and to show me the beach. It just so happened this woman saw me. The woman I was with, the family I was with, this woman who was at the adoration chapter saw us, they recognized, and they started talking. It turned out her son was a seminarian, but then he left the seminary, but now he's a helicopter pilot. This is my last day. She said, well, would you like a helicopter ride? Would I like a helicopter ride? Is the Pope Catholic? I mean, yeah, sure. So we were able to go on this ride, and this is right on the northern rim of Puerto Rico, and it was daytime, but I just thought that picture is gorgeous with the light opening and the sun rays coming down. Again, it's taken with my iPhone, so it's not I'm not a technical photographer, but these just little signs, these little capture snippets of beauty, again, elevate the spirit. So we're going to go on the way of beauty. So I'm going to go a little bit into one of my hobbies, and on the next slide you'll see one of my friends is called Newtonian. Oh, maybe I added that slide. I'm sorry. There was a slide of my telescope, so I must have got rid of that one. I apologize. So yeah. So bottom line, I did purchase a telescope for a long time ago when I was a kid, and it was a small, thin one, and I loved looking at the telescope. And when I made a little bit more money, I got a little bit bigger one. It's not humongous, but it's an 8-inch, so you can see the planets. What's beautiful to look at is and I was going to bring it here, sisters, for you and show, but with the problem is the clouds. So sometime we'll rain check on that. But yeah, you could see the bands on Saturn. You could see the rings of Saturn, the bands on Jupiter. You could see the red spot on Mars. When you look at the moon, you can see the actual craters. So I want to get a little nerdy with you. Okay, when we talk about little science here, so I don't want to put anyone to sleep here. But if we go to the next picture, you'll see this beautiful picture. I taught high school in Arizona, and this isn't a picture from that, but this is what it reminds me of. When I went out to Arizona at nighttime and looked at the sky, it's literally completely different than when you look at the night sky from downtown Bethlehem. You know, the light pollution in cities is much different than an open, vast area in the area of Arizona. And you can just see all of these glorious, glorious sparkles in the sky. And in fact, you see that little trace, that's actually what we would call the Milky Way. It's as if you're looking through the galaxy. So that's the shadedness there. And then what you see is billions and billions of stars. And it reminds me of Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims the work of his hands, you know? Or there's another from Job. Who makes the Bear, Orion, and the Pleiades? These are constellations. The Bear is known as part of the Big Dipper, Ursa Major. And the Orion, we'll look a little bit about Orion. And then the Pleiades are known as the Seven Sisters. If you're familiar with Subaru, the little decal on Subaru, that's the Seven Sisters of the Pleiades. It's a cluster of stars that is able to be seen by the naked eye. So those are just some things there. So that's there. So before I get into that, I want to just talk about this guy. His name is Brother Guy Consolamongo. He's a Jesuit brother, and he works for the director of the Vatican Observatory. So I don't know if you knew the Vatican had an observatory, but again, beautiful. He gave a talk. In fact, what's interesting for me, I live in Easton, and he was a professor before he became a Jesuit. He was a professor at Lafayette. He's a professor of astronomy. He wanted to do something different with it. He went into the Peace Corps, and he wanted to do something with his life. And they said, well, would you mind teaching science? So he wanted to get away from teaching, and when he went to the Peace Corps, he ended up teaching. So a great guy. He's got a great sense of humor. He recently wrote a book. What was the book? It's going to come to me. I didn't write down the name. But what he makes this great point. He says, God wants the universe to be understandable. And so he works for he's a director of the Vatican Observatory, and one of the sites is in Mount Graham in Tucson, Arizona. So that's a dark spot, and you can view the heavens. So looking at the next slide here, this is just a couple of quotes from him. He said this: like Einstein said, the most incomprehensible part of the universe is that it can be comprehended. And he goes this, he says, beauty controls both our spiritual and our intellectual lives. But the beauty derives in part from our own humble understanding of ourselves in relation to that sun and those mountains and clouds. We are not masters of all we survey, in full and complete knowledge of how it all works. We know our scientific theories are always incomplete. We know our religious understanding of God is also always incomplete. I love that image. First of all, there's a contemporary problem, I think, sometimes is we like to pit science and faith as opposites. But in our Catholic tradition, faith and science go hand in hand. They don't contradict each other because ultimately they have their same source, truth itself. And so what he loves to show is that there's a humility to do science, there's a humility to do religion, to do theology. There's always this awe, there's something greater, you know? And we can come up with theories about different scientific principles, but it still leaves us awe. We can talk about God and we can kind of say Trinity, there's a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but there's always so much more than what we can express. That's so beautiful. So on the next slide too, there's a couple more quotes, I'll just read them to you. But God gives us any number of roadmaps to help us find the way. One is the ability to know that what it is we don't know, to realize that we always have more to be learned. This is the key and the essence of true science. Another is the confidence that with God's gifts and God's help, we actually can learn. And another most surprising aid we get, the compass that directs our intuition, is the yearning for truth, for beauty, for elegance, that directs our souls and needs to be nourished in every aspect of our human lives. What he's saying there in so many words, which is agreeing with our faith teaching, is that there's something in us that yearns for beauty. We long to see that. We yearn for truth. We yearn for goodness. There's something within us that is a drive to experience these things. And ultimately what we're saying is that God has placed them in our soul so we can connect. And that's what I think Augustine was saying earlier when he says, our hearts are restless, Lord, until they rest in you. So, okay, I'm just going to bore you with a couple more quick quotes from him. And the next slide here, just so you want to see that. The equations that describe the colors of the sunrise are remarkable for being, in their own way, every bit as beautiful as the sunrise themselves. God wants to share the sunrise with us. That's why he gave us eyes. I love that. And he was talking in this talk context, he was talking about how when he was a kid, he loved to do his mom teach him puzzles and stuff. But this is so, he said, when I do science, God is playing a game with me. He sets the puzzle and I play out the puzzles. Science is where I get to spend time with the Creator. When God invites me to encounter him in the things that have been made, as St. Paul puts it in this letter to the Romans, God is setting up a game we get to play together. It is a game that, on top of everything else, tells me he loves me. I love these quotes because they're coming from a respected scientist and obviously a man of faith too. All right, so let's look a little bit about, we're going to look a little bit about science here. Let's look at the next slide here is a picture, hopefully, that we're familiar with. That's a sunrise, actually on Christmas morning last Christmas, not this past Christmas, looking out my bedroom window. So that's downtown Easton that you can see there. That little other dot in the left is an aberration of my iPhone camera. But the big dot is the sun, okay? So before we get into some of the things that we see in the sky, I want to talk to you a little bit about numbers, just to kind of put things in perspective. I don't want to bore you, and it might get you a little... When we talk about thousands, millions, billions, trillions, it can kind of be like, kind of overwhelming the mind. So let's go a little bit here. When we talk about thousands, we talk about, that's like a lot of cities. A city has 10,000, 15,000. When we talk about our larger cities, we talk about 1 million. So like think of New York City, they have 8.5 million people, a lot. Now when we get into billions, like our galaxy has approximately between 200 and 400 billion stars in the galaxy. Can we even comprehend billion? Someone gave me this analogy, like 100 billion, we had 100 billion $1 bills, okay? And we put them end to end, okay? So a billion of them. We put them end to end. It would go around the earth 200 times. Okay? And if you stacked it vertically, meaning that the dollar bill, the dollar bill, the dollar bill, the dollar bill, it would go to the moon and back 10 times. So there's just visuals that kind of give you a sense of numbers. If you want someone, you want to punish someone, you say, well, I shouldn't say punish someone. I was working with my little niece one time and we were practicing numbers. So to have her count to 1,000, that was more hectic for me to listen to that than to, but just to get her practicing that. Well, if you ask someone to count to 1 billion, you know how long that would take if they used one number per second? So I asked someone to count to 1 billion and I said one number every second, you wouldn't complete it until your 31st birthday. Do you know how long it would take to count to trillion? 31,000 years. So we start thinking about, we use the word billion and trillion, but I mean, really, it's incomprehensible to our mind. Okay? So I'm just getting you warmed up here, okay? I'm getting a little science lesson here. We're going to go now into a little space facts, okay? Let me go here for a second. We're going to talk about the speed of light, all right? Speed of light is a constant, I'm going to put it in familiar. It's 186,000 miles a second. So a light year, or the speed of light, a light year is considered the distance light travels in a year going that speed. Okay? So the speed of light, you're all going to get quizzed after this, 186,000 miles every second. Okay, so let's use an image. If we could travel at that speed, you could go around the perimeter of the earth 7 times in 1 second. That's how fast the speed of light. Again, incomprehensible. However, this is going to be kind of helping us to know. Light travels at that speed. So you see this beautiful sun here, right? This sun is approximately 864,000 miles in diameter. That's 109 Earths across its diameter. Pretty big. Okay. Sunlight takes about 8 minutes to travel from the sun to us. So theoretically, if the sun exploded, we wouldn't know it for 8 minutes. Not that that's going to come. So it's roughly 95 million miles away. So it's really, a little bit there. Let's go to the next slide. What's the next slide we have here? Okay. So this is a scaled drawing, all right? I don't have a picture of the moon in there. I don't have a slide of the moon, but the moon, just to give you a little bit there, is about 239,000 miles from the Earth. If you put 30 Earths side by side, you would get to the moon. To give you a sense of how far the moon is from us. If you could travel at the speed of light, it would take about a second to get there. Now let's give you something more real. If you could travel to the moon at 65 miles an hour, that's what you all drive on the highways, I hope. A little bit faster maybe. All right? If you could travel roughly at 65 miles an hour to the moon, it would take you 5 months to get there. Okay? Now it's funny, when you look at the sky, I'm not encouraging you to look at the sun, but the sun and the earth from our perspective seems almost like the same size. Okay? But the sun is 400 times larger than the moon. But the sun is 400 times farther away than the moon is. So it kind of gives us, from our perspective, a little bit interesting. All right, so when you all grew up, we learned about 9 planets, right? But there's actually 8 planets and 1 dwarf planet. Pluto is no longer considered an official planet. Now that's a whole other talk in the scientific community. But as you look there, you can see in that size, it's roughly to give you, so the small little dot there is the first planet is Mercury. Then the next planet is Venus. Then Earth, you see there with the there. Then Mars. Then Jupiter. So these are per person. So you see how big Jupiter is compared to Earth. Yeah. Then the next one is Saturn. And then the next one is Uranus. And the next one is Neptune. And then those 2 little dots out there are that's some of the dwarf planets. That's Pluto. some of its moons. So again, this is giving you a proportional view of how big Saturn and Jupiter are compared to the Earth. And then you think those are big. Look at how big they are to the moon. I mean, to the sun. To the sun. So again, immensely. So just to give you a little flavor of that for a second, if you wanted to travel to Mars, okay, at 65 miles an hour, it would take you about 62 years to get there. All right. To get to Jupiter, all right, if you're traveling at 65 miles an hour, it's going to take you 650 years. So if you traveled at the speed of light, it would take you 32 minutes. Okay, so you're just getting, just trying to throw you out some numbers to give the vastness. Saturn is only about 750 million miles away. So that would take you about an hour traveling the speed of light. And if you traveled by car at 65 miles an hour, and even if you went a little faster, 1,300 years. Okay, so let's go to the next slide here. This is just another, again, to show you the proportionality of the size. They're not, it's not the distances are there, the sizes are kind of showing you the differences there. All right, so now we're going to go to the next slide here, and this is giving you a little bit, I hope I'm not nerding you out too much. For me, some of this is fascinating because some of this I didn't learn when I learned science in college. So you see here the center sun, and you see the yellow lines surrounding the orbits. They're technically not circles, they're technically ellipses, so that's a little bit off. They're not perfect circles. And if you get to that little fuzzy white line, or that fuzzy line around on the plane of our solar system, that's called the Kuiper Belt. The Kuiper Belt is a bunch of rocks and ice, and actually Pluto is part of that. Part of those rocks that rotate in the Kuiper Belt. And so there's a lot of other things similar to Plato. That's why it kind of got demoted from a planet to become a dwarf planet. Now, that being said, if you expand outward, and this picture here is, if you can picture that wider blue with the white dots, is a sphere. Okay, it's a sphere around the solar system. That's called the Oort cloud. Okay, the Oort cloud, if you travel, to get to the Oort cloud and you traveled at the speed of light, 186,000 miles a second, it would take you 3 years to get to the Oort cloud. Okay, in that cloud, there are approximately 1 trillion comets. Okay. So that's just giving you a little bit of sense there. So I don't know if you're familiar, if you go to the next slide, there was a comet last summer called Comet Neowise. This is taken from from the parish fire escape. I like to go out there at nighttime, not when it's snowing, but I have been when it's snowing, but when it's a nice day. Very hard where I circled it there. If you look in the center, you see a little fuzzy. If you go to the next slide, that's a little bit better. You can see that little fuzzy thing. Again, that's taken with my cell phone. So I'm not experienced here. That is called Comet Neowise. Neowise is an acronym that stands for Near Earth Orbit Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer. All right, you'll all be tested on that afterwards. That comet is basically a big rock with lots of ice. And as it goes from the Oort cloud around the sun, as it gets closer to the sun, it begins to melt. And it begins to get a tail. And as it goes around the sun rather, it's going to go back into the Oort cloud, and the tail is going to, as it goes further away from the sun, the tail is going to start to stop. It'll basically freeze up again and become a ball, so the tail goes away. So it's very hard, but if you look very closely, you can see the rock. The comet itself is 5 kilometers wide. Okay, and its orbital period. I mean, how long does it take to go from around the sun back to the Oort cloud? A mere 6,766 years.
Oh my gosh.
So none of us are going to see that again. So what happens is the famous comet, Halley's Comet. There was Hale-Bopp Comet. There's a couple. Well, you see there's a lot of comets that you can see with the scope, with a telescope. But this was visible to the naked eye, or if you had binoculars. So it was kind of a big thing. Again, just kind of giving you this sense of the cosmos, okay? All right, how's everyone holding up? I hope I'm not overwhelming you. I hope this is fascinating. I love it, but sometimes the numbers can get a little bit here. If you go to the next slide, this is taken right above, on a winter day, right above my my church, Our Lady of Mercy, or the former St. Bernard's. And if you look there, you see 3 stars in a row and a couple other stars. If you go to the next slide, I kind of botched it up a little bit. But if you go there, you see there that the yellow arrows are pointing to 3 dots. That's known, and the black circle is showing you the constellation Orion. Okay? The yellow arrows are pointing to what is known as Orion's belt. And if you can see where that circle, that red circle, that star there, and if you go to the right, there's another bright star there. And then if you go and make a line going below the arrow to the bottom, there's a bright star, that star there. And then you go to the left, and you see that star. You can see that kind of makes a rectangle. That's kind of intended to be like the body of the hunter, okay? And the belt, where right around the belt is. And there's other things that, when they named these constellations, maybe they were, I don't know, having some type of out-of-body experience, because sometimes it's hard to really picture that. But when you look at pictures, you see that that's known as Orion the Hunter. And so you see that that's Orion constellation. If you look south today, if it was clear out, you could see that up. This is a winter constellation. It's gorgeous. And you can catch it because you're going to see the noticeable 3 belts, okay? Let me go a little bit here. If you see that upper left-hand star, that star that's circled with the red, okay? That would be known as Betelgeuse. Okay, that star is Betelgeuse. Let me tell you a little bit about that. That's known as a red supergiant. Last summer, it was in the news. They were talking about maybe it's going to explode, because when a supergiant explodes, it creates what they call a supernova, and it would be something we would see with the naked eye during the day. It wouldn't affect us. It's too far away, because the distance that star is a mere 643 light years away. What does that mean? That means if you're traveling at the speed of light, 186,000 miles a second, it would take you 643 years to there. So let me put it another way. If we could communicate with someone on that star, say around that star there were planets, someone living there, and we sent a message traveling at the speed of light, it would take 643 years to get there. Then they would write an answer and they would send it back to us. It would take 643 years. That's what, 1,280 years to make it one message. Could you imagine texting that way? So again, this is just giving you some amazing distances of there, okay? This star is known as Betelgeuse, as I said. Its diameter is 1,000 times that of the sun. Let's go to the next slide. You see in the lower left-hand corner the sun, that little dot? Oh, yeah. That's to scale what the sun would be relative to the big red star called Betelgeuse. Now, if you replaced our sun with Betelgeuse, meaning you took that star, Betelgeuse, and placed it where our sun is in our solar system, the outer edge of that star would be in the orbit of, beyond the orbit of Jupiter. So just go back one slide if you can do that for a second. And you see that little star would make our sun seem like a little pebble. But what happens is it looks so small is because we're so far away. Okay. So let's go to the next slide and then the next slide. All right, so now these are all stars that are within our galaxy. This is not a picture, this is a drawing, because no one's been outside of our galaxy to take a picture. But this is our Milky Way galaxy, okay? And right there, that says, the scientists say roughly there's 100,000 light years in diameter. So to go one edge to the other edge of the Milky Way galaxy would take 100,000 light years. That means traveling at that speed, it would take 100,000 years to get across the Milky Way galaxy. Okay. Again, as I said before, the Milky Way galaxy has about 400 billion stars. Okay. Let's go to the next picture. This next picture is a picture known as the Andromeda Galaxy. This is the furthest object that you can see with the naked eye on a dark night. Okay? This galaxy, which is outside of our galaxy, okay, is approximately, I think it's 2.5 million light years away. So to travel to that galaxy at the speed of light, it would take 2.5 million years to get there. So the light that we're actually seeing when we look in a telescope or with the naked eye is 2.5 million years old. So you want to really get some weird things? Maybe that's not even existing right now. Maybe it exploded about 500,000 years ago. We won't know for another 500,000 years. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, this kind of like really boggles the mind. And not boggles it, it's awe. It's so beyond us. All right. How's that go? So this last picture, okay? I hope I'm not losing you. I hope I'm making this. This is a picture called the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. Okay, what happened in this picture? Well, you know the Hubble telescope, which is a telescope that is orbiting the Earth. So it doesn't have to look through the atmosphere. It is now looking at the solar system without any of the Earth's atmosphere. You can get incredible pictures. And so what happened is this picture was taken in the year 2003, and the Hubble Space Telescope pointed at a small patch of the sky. Now, if I can kind of give you, if I took a dime, okay? If I took a dime and hold it out at arm's length, okay? The amount that area that the dime is covering in the sky is what the Hubble telescope was looking at. And it was a supposed dark spot. There wasn't any evidence that there was anything there. They exposed this light, they gathered the light, and this is the picture that's there. Now, what I want to kind of blow your mind with is this. Of that picture there are only 4 stars in that picture. Every other point of light is a galaxy.
Oh my gosh.
There's over 10,000 galaxies in that tiny space. And let's just speculate that for every galaxy, there's 100 billion stars. Psalm 8 says this beautifully. When I consider your heavens, the work of your hands, the moon and the stars, which you have ordained, what is man that you take through, that you think of him, and the Son of Man that you care for him? Or what is woman? I want to be correct, right? But this idea is that the cosmos is so enormous that we feel insignificant when we start thinking about how small we are compared to the vastness. But what does our faith teach us? Our faith teaches us that the God, the creator of the universe, knows you, loves you, sent his son to die for us. We are important. So yes, we are small in this world, and the creator of the universe is amazing. But that God who created the universe knows us and loves us. It's powerful. It's powerful to reflect. All right, let me give you a little bit of Walt Whitman. I'm not a big poet, but I like this poem. Oh, it's not, no? Okay. I'm sorry. Go back. It must be good. I'm going to read to you the poem. That's probably what I have there. This is a poem by Walt Whitman called When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and the diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I sitting heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. I love that poem. I had an experience of, and this is nothing negative at all. I went to the Lehigh Valley Astronomical Society, and I joined that when I was in college, and I had like this enthusiasm, and they were talking about some deep, like, you know, they were going through all these numbers, and it was calculations, and like, I just want to go out and look at the stars. And so when I heard that poem, that really spoke to me, you know, that we can try to speculate with all these numbers and try to count, but something just being out there lifts our soul, brings us wonder. So let me bring it back to a beautiful scene here. This is the ocean. Everyone loves the ocean. All right. So just this is a beach in the northern part of Puerto Rico. And I look at that now, and guess what? I wish I was there. We all wish we were there, right? So these are just some pictures I took with my phone. I was on a hike during the pandemic trying to get out and to try to keep your mind sane. The next picture here is a beautiful little simple flower. And you know, the flower is sort of, it's just, this was just right along the trail. And you look closely, I don't know if you remember from your science class, if you ever had to take apart a flower, diagram a flower, and how the pistil and the anther and the pollen goes into the stamen and all these, it's just, we can analyze that, but just to look at that beauty. And the flower is very small. In fact, I would think that that head is smaller than a dime. I brought it really close, okay? So you just look at the intricacies of the flower. So my point is, like, I think this is like, we got to kind of counterbalance our mind. Like, we're looking about the vastness of the universe. And now let's look at some more small details. So let me show you the next picture. So that was another picture of an inchworm that I had on my finger. And again, something small, something simple, something beautiful. Okay? And you're thinking about that too when I contemplate the inchworm. That's inchworm is going to be put into a cocoon and become a moth or a butterfly. So like that small little, the size of my finger creature is in this, is part of the cosmos, is part of the beauty of the world, and it has a journey to make. It has a transformation to make. So like, even contemplating that, we can think about our own transformation, how we're all on a journey. So there's a lot of stepping off spots from there. All right, I go back to my favorite picture just to kind of, I get peace from that picture. If you're ever looking, I think it's off of Cherryville Road in Northampton. Right around May, these fields of gold are beautiful. All right, so we're going to skip the next slide. I'm not going to go into that. We're going to go to the slide. I switched to the Walt Whitman poem, so that was it. Okay, that's what happened. All right, we're going to go to the next slide. And the next slide. Well, I'll comment on this just for go back one. I apologize. This is it's kind of like an interview. This is an intermission here. I've been talking about this. I experienced this in one of my classes on management and pastoral. I think it's taken from Stephen Covey. Circle of concern versus the circle of influence. And the circle of influence are all those factors we can control, we have influence. Circle of concern are those factors that we have no control over. And what happens is that, you know, these are just some examples. The price of gas, rainfall, other people's actions, war in the Middle East, who the next president will be, other people's opinion. Those are all that can really, the effects of the coronavirus, all those things are real and they can cause us concern, but we have no control over them. Whereas the circle of influence are factors we can control. My words, my behavior, my actions. And the idea that Stephen Covey proposed and that what we were given to in our parish is that we have to put our energies in that circle of influence. And when we put our energies in that circle of influence might expand. And it might have an effect on the circle of concern. But when we put our energies and focus on the circle of concern, we're spinning our wheels. You know, and we're losing a lot of energy. And we're getting overwhelmed. And the fear and the worry and the anxiety and the frustrations of life can really weigh us down. So it's important to make sure that we take time for that beauty and take encounter God in our circle of influence, and that can have different experiences. Okay. All right. Hope everyone's doing okay. You know, let's move on to another photo. That was some of nature. I want to go a little bit of music here, and I just want to share a little bit about this. I came across this about maybe 3 or 4 years. His name is Benjamin Zander, and he is the chief not the composer. What's the word I want to say? Conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra. But he had a TED Talk, and the TED Talk was called The Transformative Power of Classical Music. And he takes this in his talk through a piece of Chopin music, and he just beautifully presents it. And you listen to it, and the music just moves you. I encourage you to watch it. It had a profound effect in my life. I am not a musical person in the sense that I don't know. I mean, I know notes, and I'm not an accomplished musician. So this is all coming from a non-expert in music, but it has opened up rich experiences for me. So the transformative power of classical music there. So his discovery was this. He said, as a conductor, he is the only person in an orchestra that does not make music. Rather, the conductor draws out the music from the musicians. And I thought that was a powerful image for me just as a pastor. My job is not to change people or to create music or to make people say things or do things. My job is to encourage people to live their faith. and to draw out of them that desire to love the Lord and to present to them that. And so like this idea that, and then when you think about music, we have to follow the score, right? Musicians don't just kind of arbitrarily play. I mean, they can put a little bit of their unique talent to it, but there's a score. There's the musical that's there to try to come together. And when you start looking at orchestras and we look at music that way, yes, there are solos, but there's this beautiful image of community. You can't make beautiful orchestra symphony music by yourself. There's a powerful to reflect on that, working together. So there's Benjamin Zander. I love his hair. He looks a little bit crazy. He's got a great accent, but he's awesome. I really found he's got a lot where he would take musicians and help them listen to and improve upon their music. And they would play a piece. He would talk about it, and then he'd help them to play it again in a new way. And you could feel the music. It's beautiful. So what I'd like to do is just play for you a little a piece. This is another thing I learned from it, is the whole idea of a symphony. I don't want to sound like I'm an expert in symphonies, but did you know symphonies have typically 4 parts? And there's 4 movements. And the first movement, the second movement, the third movement, the fourth movement. Some have 5, like Beethoven had 5, and there's a couple of other 5s. But usually, traditionally, symphonies have about 4 movements. And they're like a book. No one reads a book and says, I'm going to read chapter 2, and then I'm going to read chapter 7. You read chapter 1, which leads into chapter 2, and there's a whole conclusion. And so when you listen to a whole piece of music, there's actually tells a story. Now, if you have a really good musical ear, which I do not, you start hearing a certain theme, and then there's variations on that theme, and then there's all these different things that are taking place. There's all these different things that deal with music. So what I want to look at just briefly with you is a symphony from the New World Symphony from Anton Dvorak. You may have heard it. And basically, he premiered this on December 16th, 1893 at Carnegie Hall. And there was a story of he was a Czech composer who came to the United States. He was influenced by African American spirituals and Native American sounds of America. Leonard Bernstein, the famous musician, famous conductor, identified many themes with Czech, French, German, Scottish, and Chinese origins. So this is a melting pot, if you will, of music, and he says it's described it as distinctly American, exactly because it was made up of so many elements representing the diverse American culture. So what I'd like to play with you, when you hear the New World Symphony from Anton Dvorak, usually what's very familiar is the beginning of the second movement. But what I'd like to play for you is about 3 or 4 minutes of the closing of the first movement. It's called a coda. So it's going to be kind of closing that, and then it's going to go into the second movement, which is familiar to all of us. Then we're going to stop there. We could listen to the whole thing, but the whole thing would take about 35, 40 minutes, and that would defeat my purpose here of our talk. But let me just, maybe invite you just to be comfortable, close your eyes, and just listen to the music. Maybe you can pick out, we're going to listen to 2 portions of that, and just enjoy the music, and I hope it moves you. Listen to the different instruments, listen to the crescendos, all those things, and just let the music move your heart. So that ends the first movement. We're just listening as we go into the second movement. Perfect. I don't know how it came across hearing it at home. I mean, if you have a pair of headsets and you can just veg out to that music, I mean, the first movement is very stirring and you can hear the crescendos and, you know, it's amazing how it just stirs you. There's that certain theme that plays through and you hear, and then the second, it just kind of brings you to that close, don't, you know, like kind of jar. And then the beautiful ease of the hymn-like second movement that's very famous to many. When you think of the New World Symphony, most people think of the beginning of the second movement, and you just hear the flutes and the violins and the trombones, the cellos, the basses, and then you hear it go into the full orchestra. And the beautiful is just like as you reflect on the beautiful harmonizations and the working together and how each sound contributes to communicating the beauty. I mean, it takes you on a journey. I mean, you close your eyes. Like sometimes I fall asleep, but other times you can feel stirred, and it's beautiful. And that's what beauty does. And our Dvorak was very influential on John Williams. I'm not sure if you know John Williams composed music for Star Wars or for Jaws. So I want you to this is the fourth movement of the New World Symphony. I'm only going to play 30 seconds, but let me see if you can hear any Jaws themes or perhaps maybe something that might have inspired Star Wars. So listen attentively to the fourth movement, the first 30 seconds. That was the Jaws component. You think of Han Solo and Luke Skywalker flying away from the Death Star, you know. But you can hear. I mean, too. I'm not that accomplished, but when I heard those songs, I like that brought to mind. I know that John Williams, the composer of that, was highly influenced by Dvorak. So again, this is just an example of how music can really elevate your soul. The beauty, the harmony in the orchestra. And like I said, for me, this is a great discovery that to listen to each of those pieces, it's a whole book. Like the fourth movement actually has themes that were placed in the first movement that kind of tie a nice little bow into it. And then there's music that resolves nicely, and then there's music that kind of like, it feels like but it moves you. There's something beautiful about that. So that's kind of a little in the beauty of music. So like what we've been looking at wonder and beauty through science and nature. You know, hopefully some of those scenes came clear. The pictures of the like the astronomy, the pictures of the planets, the moon, the sun, different things like that. Just the vastness of our cosmos, of our universe. And then hopefully maybe some music stirs you. What I'd like to take a little bit is look a little bit about a piece of artwork that really has touched my life. And I have a couple quotes, and I'm sorry, my source, I think this is from Pope Benedict on beauty. He says this: "Perhaps it has happened to you at one time or another, before a sculpture, a painting, a few verses of poetry, or a piece of music, to have experienced deep emotion, a sense of joy, to have perceived clearly, that is, that before there stood not only matter, a piece of marble or bronze, a painted canvas, an ensemble of letters or combination of sounds, but something far greater, something that speaks, something capable of touching the heart, of communicating a message, of elevating a soul." The next slide is this is a work of art is the fruit of the creative capacity of the human person who stands in wonder before the visible reality, who seeks to discover the depths of its meaning and to communicate it through the language of forms, colors, and sounds. Art is capable of expressing and of making visible man's need to go beyond what he sees. It reveals his thirst and his search for the infinite. Indeed, it is like a door opened to the infinite, open to the beauty and a truth beyond the everyday. And a work of art can open the eyes of the mind and heart, urging us upward. I love those words, very rich, very... I'd like to share a picture of the next of this piece of artwork. This is known as the Annunciation. Okay, so this picture, I had this experience in the seminary. I went to Philadelphia Seminary, St. Charles, and they had the Philadelphia Art Museum. And on Sundays, you had a student ID, you'd get free admission, so something free. So I ended up going my last 2 years often to the art museum on a Sunday just by myself and looking at the art. And I was not really into art. I didn't really know much about art. I was a science major in college. And this picture in its original is there. And this picture captivated me. And I literally sat on a bench across from that picture and I stared at it for a half hour. What's going on? But it's beautiful. This is known as the Annunciation. It was painted in 1898 by Henry H.O. Tanner, Henry Ossawa Tanner. H.O. Tanner is known as his name. He was a realist painter. He was one of the leading painters of sacred art during the 19th and early 20th centuries. Tanner was African American, and he was the premier painter of African descent in all art history. He was a student of Thomas Eakins. So if you're familiar with Thomas Eakins, he did a lot of religious art too. He was a student of his. Realist painters try to capture a real view, not some type of abstract description of it, but try to really get an authentic view of what it might have been. And so he depicts Mary as Mary would have appeared when an angel appeared to her, a teenage Jewish girl from Israel. Modern Middle Eastern features, her poor status and humble status. I love the rumpled sheets, the plain walls, if you look closely, with fissures and cracks. no possessions except for low-burning lamp and a jug. Her humility and receptivity to the message of the angel. I love that. There's an openness. Mary models for us, from a theological perspective, her yes, like receiving what God wants to give and her cooperation with that. And Mary obviously did that in a unique way in becoming the mother of God, but she becomes the model for all Christians to learn to be receptive to God. And her posture is that receptivity. Just stare at her, gaze at the angel. She doesn't look afraid necessarily, but maybe a little hesitant what's going on, but also I can look at this. The angel is interesting. If you look at a lot of annunciations, there's this big winged angel, and often the angel is the emphasis, right? The angel and then Mary. The emphasis is Mary in the center, and the angel's there, But angel is depicted here as a pillar of light. Gabriel illuminates Mary in the heavenly glow. And it's interesting, if you look closely at the image of light there, it bisects the shelf on the upper left hand, kind of symbolizing a cross. You see that in the upper left-hand corner where it kind of looks like a cross? And there's another interesting thing there. If you look closely on the shelf, there's a pot there. And then if you look on the floor, there's a pot. And then if you look closely right next to her bed on the right, there's a pot. And some people have said it forms a triangle. And Mary's in the center of that triangle. Do you see that?
Yes.
So kind of that image of the Trinity, It also alludes to her as a vessel of our Lord. I think of the great prayer that she prays, the Magnificat. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior, for he looks with favor on his lowly servant. So just take a moment and stare at that or look at that picture, maybe just for your own. What draws you? What attracts you? What moves you when you look at that picture? If you want, you can go online and buy a print. So again, H.O. Tanner, the Annunciation. If you're interested in seeing the original, it's at the Philadelphia Art Museum. I don't know if they still give out free passes to students. But again, a gorgeous piece of artwork that, again, as that quote from Pope Benedict earlier said, it moved my heart. It moved me. It led me to something beyond. And that's what I think good beauty does, beauty is that pathway pointing to the beautiful. So I just want to transition now into one thing we're wrapping up here, is that what we see here is now, I'd like to show a little bit of beauty in the saints, in the people who lived. Mary obviously is an example of a woman who said yes to God. And that's really our task as Christians, is to learn to be receptive to the invitation of God. And there's one of my favorite saints, St. Francis de Sales. I'm an alum of the Sales University, except it was Allentown College at the time. So I'm Allentown College of St. Francis de Sales. But I love this quote. What sung music is to notes on a score, the lives of the saints are to the gospel. So you picture, like, to make music, you have to look at the score, and with your particular instrument, you make beautiful music. And we thought about that when we think about that orchestra. When we think about beautiful music, a symphony, you can't make beautiful music by yourself. You need to cooperate with that. Well, there's analogies to that in our life as Christians, right? The body of Christ, each and every one of us is a unique instrument. I liked, what was it? I was in El Salvador at Oscar Romero, St. Oscar Romero now. He said, I'm a microphone for the Lord. And we are vessels. We are human vessels, fragile, weak, sinful. We fall apart at times. But God still loves us. And he needs us. And I say that not in a metaphysical way, but God's plan, he created us. And in a certain sense, I'd like to say it this way, he becomes dependent on us. He calls us to cooperate with him, to bring beautiful music into the world. And I don't mean literally the music, but through our lives, through our charity, through loving another person, by visiting a person who's sick, by being patient with that neighbor who you want to, and you give that person time and you listen to them and they're grateful for it, and maybe they're not grateful for it. That's the gospel message. And that's what God calls us to, is to be his instrument, to make beautiful music, to follow his score. He's ultimately the conductor, right? God's ultimately the conductor, drawing out of us with our unique instrument, tuned to a unique key, but following that score, we can make beautiful music in the symphony of life. So I have a lot more, and I don't want to take more of your time, but I'm just going through the scrolls. I have something on St. Francis of Assisi as an example. His Canticle of the Sun. He talks about beautiful images of brother sun and sister moon. So he's really in touch with the beauty of God's creation and recognizing that these are all signposts pointing to the one, God himself. St. Teresa of Calcutta. You think of Sister Mother Teresa, and she says this beautiful line, not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. There's something moving in a scene like that where she is loving the poorest of the poor. We don't have to go to Calcutta or form a religious order, but we're poor, if we're honest, before God. But there's people who are longing for an ear, for an encouraging word, for a patient look, a kind gesture. God relies on us to bring that into the world. We're living in a world where that's so lacking, and it's so easy to say, oh, you are whatever I'm not. You're a Republican, you're a Democrat, oh, you're this, you're that, As Christians, we have to we are lovers of Jesus Christ, and we want to strive to live the gospel message in our words. And sometimes people will laud us and encourage us and be happy with us, and then guess what? Some people will be upset with us. What happened to Jesus ultimately, right? So we have to be rooted in Christ and living our lives according to his score so that we can be instruments of bringing his love into the world. Today is, or not today, but February 8th was the feast of St. Josephine Bakhita, my little niece, not my niece, I mean my cousin. She's taken St. Josephine Bakhita as her confirmation name. And this saint is an amazing woman. She was born in Sudan in 1869. She was kidnapped by Arab slave traders. She was bought and sold and given away over a dozen times. Spent in captivity. She forgot her original name. They gave her name Bakhita. Bakhita actually, I think, was in Sudanese, or maybe it was Arabic. That means the lucky one, that she survived. She was scarred and beaten. She had over 114 scars on her body. What happened is she was actually living as a servant with an Italian family, and it was there that she was actually able to gain her freedom. And she joined the religious life with the Canossian sisters. She died on February 8th, 1947. Her last words were, my lady, perhaps referring to our Blessed Mother. And this quote here, I love this in context of our conversation today. Seeing the sun, the moon, and the stars, I said to myself, who could be the master of these beautiful things? And I felt a great desire to see him, to know him, and to pay him homage. I don't have the quote for me directly. I used it of her in my homily on February 8th, but basically she has this quote of saying this. Had she not been kidnapped, she would have never met Jesus Christ and entered his church. And there's something beautiful about, it would be so easier for her to look how I've been treated and to be angry and to be bitter and her heart to be closed. But God's grace transformed her. And so I don't know if this is going to make sense. Some theologians talk about Jesus on the cross is beautiful. And to the natural eye, it's not. It's repulsive. It's violent. It's ugly. But to the eyes of faith, what it's revealing us is the love of God. This is Jesus saying, this is how much I love you. I go to the ends of the earth to show you my love. And when I think of this woman and her beaten body and her scarred body and how God has worked in her life to share, share in the community with the Kenoshan sisters. And apparently she did a lot of simple things in the house, but she was filled with joy, and people would come to the house to meet her and to hear an encouraging word. Her life is beautiful. It's sad, yes, there's tragic moments in it, but the transformative power of God's grace is what's so awesome. So I just have two more quotes, and I want to close up with her. But she has these quotes. She says this, I love this. I travel slowly, one step at a time, because I'm carrying two big suitcases. One contains my sins, and the other, which is much heavier, are the infinite merits of Jesus. When I reach heaven, I will open the suitcase and say to God, Eternal Father, now you can judge. And to St. Peter, close the door, because I'm staying. A beautiful sense of humor there. And then this is kind of, I think, a quote from her. This is kind of her motto. Be good, love the Lord, pray for those who do not know him. What a great grace it is to know God. She talks elsewhere, too, about the name Master. She found the name Master to be very appealing. He was the master. Her whole life was horrible masters who abused and hurt her. But when she came to know God, it was that name was beautiful to her. So I think Pope Benedict wrote about her in his cyclical "God is Love." Beautiful. So again, this is just one example of the saints. So I'm going to wrap up with this. This is Eucharistic amazement. And what I want to get at there is that, our faith teaches us that what we see with our natural eyes is this white host, right? This piece of bread. But our faith informs us that is the sacrament of Jesus' body, blood, soul, and divinity. That when we look at the host, when we look at Jesus, that is the God of the universe present in our tabernacles, present on our altars, who doesn't want to stay away from us, but wants to unite with us, to form a union with us, to commune with us. Beauty himself wants to fill our hearts and transform it. We see it in nature. We see it in music. We see it in art. We see it in the lives of the saints. This same Jesus knows you, all those out there, right? And loves us. And he wants us to trust him. He wants us to open our hearts to him. He wants us to know that he is with us always, that he loves us. This is a little quote from Pope. I'm going to close with Pope Francis here. You can keep, no, go back a little bit. Sorry. That image there. He says this catechism, in this boundless vastness, what are we as human beings? Almost nothing, says another song. A being which is born, a being that dies, an extremely fragile creature. Nevertheless, in the whole universe, the human being is the only creature aware of such abundant beauty. In life, with all its bitterness, at times threatens to suffocate in us the gift of prayer. We have but to contemplate a starry sky, a sunset, a flower, to rekindle the spark of gratitude. I guess that was the next quote. I apologize. Okay, so that was my reflection on wonder and beauty. And, I guess maybe more profoundly, when I find myself, I'm actually just kind of trying to share my experience, my witness of how God has touched me through these beautiful things. And I hope that as I shared that, perhaps some of you could identify with that and different elements of this. I forget where I heard this, but God is always shouting at us, not shouting at us, but like the world around us is shouting God's presence. I'm here, look at me, love me, I want you to love you. And that's been my experience. And, life is beautiful and life sucks. I wish I could come up with a word that has beautiful and sucks together. And what I mean by that, and I'm not pessimistic, what I mean by that is that there's moments of joy, there's moments of loss, but life is hard. Life is difficult, and I think we've experienced that this last year in the pandemic. There's been the shutdowns and the isolation and the violence and the politics and our neighbor cutting us off as we just shoveled out our parking space, and then someone else. My point is, we can find whatever the particulars are. Life is difficult, But the certainty is that God is with us. He cares for us deeply, loves us, and wants us to trust him more, to focus on him, and to allow the grace of God to transform us little by little. And beauty and wonder can do that. So when the snow is stopped and the sidewalks are nicer, I encourage you to go out for a walk, listen to the birds. One of the beautiful things I saw the other day is a red cardinal against the white snow with a little bit of the leafless trees. And it's chirping. Beautiful. So again, I thank you for joining us for this Twilight Retreat Day. And I pray that through this day you were able to get a little bit of a touch of wonder and to recognize that God is not distant from us, but God is very close to us and loves each and every one of us and calls us to that deeper trust. So thank you for your presence and this opportunity to share this work. So God bless you.